Well, we thank you for joining us. We're here with a very special guest, Bill Waldroop, a precious friend of mine and brother in Christ, and we're going to have a little dialogue, a little conversation today. Reason being, we're in Acts chapter 27. Paul now is going to be transferred from Caesarea, where he's been in prison for over 2 years. On the heels of his journey is on the heel of him appearing before King Agrippa and before Festus, and there Paul gives a wonderful testimony of his faith in Jesus Christ, meeting Christ. And of course, that's recorded initially in Acts chapter 9. But as we look at his testimony before others, King Agrippa is an example, Festus, Felix, Paul gives us, in those cases, a little more information, and Luke records that information, and augments what Acts chapter 9 tells us about his conversion, his seeing the risen Lord. And so now it's probably September, October of the year, not necessarily the best time to be crossing the Mediterranean Sea, but we're going to pick up, and I'm going to read just a few verses, and then Bill and I, we're just going to dialogue, and I want to pick his brain and pick his heart because he has a very keen interest in Paul's journey and the shipwreck. And Bill has quite a bit of experience in ships and loading and balancing and the dynamics of what it takes to cross a great body of water. And just want to listen to him today, and the parallels that he will draw too will be quite interesting, because even within this shipwreck, one might not think about it, but even in this journey and in the shipwreck and the dynamics of the sea and the ship, even there is a gospel presentation that can be birthed from that. Bill, thank you so much for being with us today, and so glad that you're with us.
Yeah.
He and Linda are just special friends of ours. I'm going to pick up reading verse 27, and then we're going to talk with Bill and just hear from his heart and his brain, and we'll take the journey with Luke and with Paul as we read 27. I'm going to read just a few verses, give us some context. In verse 1 of chapter 27, when it was decided that we would sail, and notice it's a we, that means Luke is with them. This is another section, what we call the we section, the first person plural pronoun we. Paul says, or Luke says that we would sail for Italy. They proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoner to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a Domitian ship, I'm trying to pronounce that, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. And from there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed through the sea along the coasts of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. And there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. And when we had sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty had arrived at Cnidus, since the wind did not permit us to go farther, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmon. And with difficulty sailed past it. We came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. And when considerable time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over, and it's probably a reference to the Day of Atonement, so it puts us around September, October of the year, Paul began to admonish them and said to them, Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached the decision to put out to sea from there, if somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. When a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. But before very long, there rushed down from the land a violent wind called, and I'm going to take a stab at this, Eurykilo. And when the ship was caught in it and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and let ourselves be driven along. This is, Bill, an action-packed description by Luke. And Luke on ship, this is firsthand experience. And with your experience in seamanship, a lengthy experience in that, you really see a lot of dynamics going on here. And I'm going to turn you loose. What first got you interested in this shipwreck and this trip to Rome?
Well, I'm from West Texas. I had no idea that I would one day be spending over half my life on offshore drilling vessels and moving them. But I think there was a seed planted in me. I believe the Lord had this as a plan, because
absolutely,
it just worked out that way. And looking back on it, it looked like it was a natural progression. Although at the time I had no idea what I was going to be doing next. But I got involved and I went offshore. My cousins wanted me to save money to buy a sailboat. And I was the only one with a profession that could go overseas and hopefully save money. So I agreed, and after a year or so, I spent almost a year in West Texas as a roughneck, which was a requirement for an oil drilling company to send me anywhere. I had to have some knowledge of how their equipment was used. So. But I went to Colombia on a 4-month job in the jungle and gained some more experience. And then I was sent to West Africa for a 2-year contract. At the end of that contract, I had saved quite enough money to buy a decent sailboat. In fact, I found one in Great Yarmouth, England for around $30,000 that I could pay cash for.
Wow.
And pay for my cousins to come over and provisions probably for a year sailing or whatever, and then I'd have to go back to work. But that was the plan.
What year was this, Bill?
That was in 1968.
So 1968, $30,000 was a lot of money.
It was, yeah.
It's a lot of money today.
Yeah, you couldn't buy near the size sailboat you would need now for $30,000, but. This one was a used one. It was quite an old boat, but it was in a really excellent shape. It was a 34-foot sloop. Beautiful boat. And luckily we didn't buy it, because with no experience whatsoever, I'm sure we would have foundered somewhere along the way. Because that's one of the worst, the North Sea and places like that are just no place for an inexperienced sailor at all.
That brings really to mind visions of these waves crashing when Paul was traveling, and they were at the mercy of the wind.
Right. They're being driven, like it said. They're just at the mercy of the weather. And I've actually seen that in the North Sea in the 70s. We were trying to move on location, and gale force winds came up. In fact, we had 100-knot winds.
Goodness
and
gracious.
We broke one of our main tow lines, and we're being pushed into some platforms several miles away with very little maneuverability with only one tug left. And we managed to tie another tug on, actually an anchor handling supply vessel that was along with us. And I had to give that captain and his crew so much credit, because we passed them a line and they connected it in 45-foot seas.
My goodness.
I mean, they were on the back deck of that boat with waves crashing over them, and somehow they got us reconnected, and we managed to steer clear of the platforms.
So
I can understand how the people on Paul's vessel were feeling too. So.
It was, it's interesting because in a way you were driven by God's winds through all this time to bring you to a place to where He really has put you before a lot of people because you teach, still do. You teach courses on how to tow and balance and.
Yes, that was my in '71. I when my cousins decided they didn't have time or the wherewithal to buy the sailboat, I went back to finish school. I got my degree, and then the company sent me back to Nigeria as a project engineer and rig mover. They put me in charge of moving the rig.
And then when you say rig mover, you're talking about moving it over water.
Yes,
is that correct?
Yes,
we're and that brings visions of very large rigs that are capable of elevating several hundred feet and then sitting above the water and drilling. But you have to get it out to the site to begin with. So you have to know some seamanship to be able to do that.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, and luckily I had been on that rig 2 years before my first 2-year assignment. So. After I finished school, I'd been a mechanic on it. I knew where everything was, basically. I just didn't really know that much about moving. I didn't know the stability. But like the personnel manager told me on my way back over there, he said, well, frankly, nobody else knows either, so just learn as quick as you can. And in the 60s and 70s, there was a dire need for experienced personnel. So the only way that experience could be gained was to hire somebody you think could get through it and gain the experience and make the transition. So literally hundreds of us, probably thousands, did that. And some of them now are, of course, they're either really good or they're gone.
Yeah. Wow.
But
well, share with us. I know you have some notes.
Well,
there
when you were
and some
talking,
thoughts
when they talked about the lee shore and that weather, that the first boat they had was coastal service. Basically, it wasn't a deep sea going vessel. So.
And that accounts for why they hug the coast so much.
Well, it's more important for them, and a lee shore is. Especially for a sailing vessel, you have to keep to the lee shore in bad weather. If you're trying to sail along on the other side of that island, and then now the wind is pushing you onto the island, so you've got to be. If you're in the lee of it, the wind is blowing across the island to your vessel, so it's not gonna drive you aground. And there's a famous sea captain, I believe it was Captain John Smith in the 1600s, that wrote a little pamphlet on what to do in case of. And if you look down, I can visualize the captain being driven onto a lee shore because he got there and he shouldn't have. And when he looks up the answer, in Captain Smith's book, it was never allow your vessel to be put in this position. So that was a contention with them in sailing vessels all the time back in those days, and it's also to some extent with the drilling rigs. We took a rig from Ireland to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and we stopped in the Azores for fuel. And we stopped on the east side of San Miguel, I believe it was. And we had similar really terrible weather come up. So we had to pull our anchor up and go around to the other side of the island to be on the backside of the storm. So
the same principles that applied in Paul's day as far as sailing and
any low-powered vessel or we were self-propelled, but we had so much wind loads, the derrick, and we were a drilling rig that could also go under its own power, but you had to be very, very careful.
And it was a slow go.
And it took us Oh, I'm trying to think now. I think we averaged about 4 knots. We could probably
wow.
walk from Ireland to Halifax almost that quick.
That's amazing.
That was in the wintertime in the North Atlantic. It was the very worst time.
Yeah.
It was like we should have listened to Paul. You know?
Isn't that the truth? So the first ship was different. It wasn't a deep sea going vessel, but the second ship that Paul got on was a grain.
I believe it was a grain ship, and it was a larger ship. But, they were at the wrong time of year, and the weather, it doesn't matter how big the ship is now, they're going to really get hurt and get hammered.
It's kind of interesting because in Luke's narrative in chapter 27, Christ, when Paul was first arrested back in Jerusalem, Christ appeared to him at night and told him, "You must see Rome." And so Paul had that resolve, and even before he got to Jerusalem, it was amazing that Paul already knew that he was going to have to see Rome all the way back in Ephesus on the tail end of his third missionary trip. And so he comes to Caesarea, then goes up to Jerusalem. He's arrested. Jesus appears to him. He's taken back to Caesarea to protect him, really, and to stand before Felix and Festus and Agrippa. And had been in prison there for 2 years. But he had appealed to Caesar. He knew he was going to go to Rome. He knew by Christ's promise he was going to make it to Rome. He just didn't know how.
Right.
But that comes up again in Luke's narrative that Paul had that confidence from the Lord. An angel of the Lord appeared to him that you're going to go to Rome. You're going to go to Rome, and you're going to stand before the emperor there and bear testimony to his name.
And I believe,
but even though God has a plan, it's interesting that He doesn't always take us through the most convenient ways and venues
sometimes
to do that.
It makes you start to wonder a little, but then God always comes through.
Indeed. And how many people were on this second
276, I believe. I think there must have been about 100, the Roman centurion and soldiers, and then the Marine crew had to be fairly large on a vessel like that because they talk about some of the things they had to do during the voyage to try to save the vessel.
And you being a mariner, we would read this as novices, but you look at it and you really pick it apart from a navigational and a mariner standpoint, and seeing what they're doing and why.
Yeah, I was fascinated with it when I first started reading it because, we get in trouble and we have to do some things in weather, but we have air-powered winches and strong wire cables and tools. I'm sure a lot better tools than they had, and welders. If you've got to patch something, repair something, we've got a pretty good, all the equipment we need to fix
and mechanisms to
on
do
that
that.
ship. I mean, they have a ship's carpenter usually, and a lot of them they say are really good. They can repair the rudder or make repairs. They're pretty fascinating. They've made masts out of something, or So the ship's carpenter, and then I'm not sure what other kind of laborers, but they had to have someone that knew how to manage the bilge pumps. They had some type of method of pumping the bilge out. And on a grain ship, you really, as much as possible, you need to keep that cargo dry because if grain starts swelling, it's going to split the vessel apart.
Wow.
See,
those are things we just don't think about.
There's just all kinds of things.
So if the grain starts swelling, it'll split the boat.
Yeah. But, I had some notes on weather planning. So
please share those with us.
Well, your prevailing winds, of course, waves and weather, your local coastal currents, very important. In West Africa, we found that we could go close to shore and take a current going north along the coast from Nigeria up to Gabon. But if we come on the way back, if we went about 50 miles further offshore, we had a southerly current. And we went a few times not knowing that, just going from A to B.
Yeah.
And finally, we had access to some pilot charts that show your local wind, waves, and weather patterns for that time of year. And I tried to find some for the Paul's time, but all I can find is that it's the worst time of year, and it's predominantly from the northeast, the weather.
So they're sailing west.
And they're trying to go west, and they're being beat to the south, basically. And I wish I knew what the currents were at that time. So, but it's amazing to me that they went that about 500 miles and there without really knowing where they were, and came up to Malta.
They really were at the mercy of the sea and at the wind. And interesting that it was a southeasterly wind. Is that right? I mean, blowing from the north.
From the northeast, yeah. Wind comes from and current goes to. If you have a 3-knot northerly current, it's going to the north.
And they just had to let loose when they left the island of Crete. There, it's almost immediate that wind came up, the waves came up, and they just sort of had to let loose and were driven.
Sound like they didn't try to steer anything. They didn't want to break their rudders.
Well, that makes sense. And don't you see the sovereignty of God and all that? You knew God had a plan for Paul, and he's going to make it to Rome. You just don't know how he's going to get there. And it kind of describes our life. We don't know how we're going to. We know where we're going to go, but we just don't know what God's going to do to get us there. But take us through some more of the dynamics of this journey and shipwreck.
I was, let's see. Actually, also, of course, they did have good knowledge, it looked like, of the ports of call, which is important. And when we do weather planning or long-distance voyaging, you want to know which ports have bunkers for fuel, repair facilities, even maybe a dry dock if you might need it. So that information is given to you, and I'm sure the pilots and the masters of these vessels, I'm sure they had a pretty good record of what was at each port, what was available to them in an emergency.
Well, it really is down to life or death at times, and to know those ports of call, and to be able to navigate to those, and it's amazing to me because their methods,
they're getting there with navigation had to be so much harder if they couldn't see the sun or it's cloudy or they don't have the GPS or anything like that we do.
What else stands out, Bill? I know you've studied this for years, so keenly interested, and be honest with you, sometimes I don't even know the questions to ask about it. But there's so many things that you see that we don't on average, just because of your experience and expertise.
Well, that's what got me more and more interested as I was reading. When I started getting into I was asked by the university in Louisiana, southeastern Louisiana, back in 90. They needed an approved instructor to teach a stability course a naval architect developed for them and then left. So that's actually how I got started teaching. Through the Coast Guard. I'd been doing it on the rigs for years, training, but not as a Coast Guard instructor. So once I got that approval, and then I started in the classes, and I had students from all the drilling contractors and quite a few of the oil companies. So over the years, the interest and the parallels, it just kind of opened my eyes to see that why not use it as a tool, because this last class I taught in February, one of my students, I started telling the story of Paul's journey in Acts, and I said, have any of you read Paul's journey to Rome? We're talking about bad weather here. No, not really. I know Paul was a saint, and that's all he knew. I said, well, you really ought to read that because it's a great. You could probably think back in time of somewhere when you've been out there on your platform or rig or whatever and had a similar experience. And I never thought of that.
So you've actually used this shipwreck in part of the curriculum, as it were, or in
I try
your
to
class
use it,
presentation.
Yeah, I've actually added it to every class. I use this little diagram here, which is part of the class anyway. This is basic stability definitions. It's I use this parallel of environmental forces acting on a ship. And if it's not designed correctly, it hadn't been built right or not operated right correctly, then that vessel's in danger of foundering or capsizing.
So kind of walk us through this a little bit.
Okay.
Bill, because this has some application.
Well, I think it does. Yeah, if you look at a ship, it should be upright, and if those environmental forces, I've shown that by an arrow, wind, waves, weather, it can even be grounding, any external force causing the vessel to go over. If all that weather is removed, then buoyancy the forces of buoyancy and gravity are equal and opposite. So they want to be in line. So without anything pushing them out of the way of each other, that vessel will come upright and remain upright. And where that center of gravity is decided on, the naval architect that designs it, it has to be low enough to where it'll keep the vessel safe in the worst kind of weather. We generally design the rigs for 100-knot winds and 100-foot storm. And if you allow your center of gravity to start rising, you'll see this distance from G to Z, that horizontal line. That is the lever arm, gravity acting down and buoyancy up. That's a couple, isn't it? In your trigonometry, they show you pushing the top of a book this way and the bottom of a book this way.
Yeah.
Those are two equal parallel lines that'll never meet in opposite directions. And if that center of gravity is allowed to raise higher than what it was designed, the design storm, then that lever arm is getting less and less, causing the vessel to go over more and more. Right now, it's right at the water line of the main deck, and we call that angle the angle of vanishing stability. Because once that goes under, if the environmental forces get a little worse, or for some reason the center of gravity is raised, then the calculations for this distance from G to M, that's the measure of your initial stability, the M is going to come down because of the reduction in the water plane area of the vessel. For engineering students, if you're looking at structural beams, the moment of inertia of a beam, which is related to the bending. Well, the moment of inertia of the water plane area is the resistance to rolling. So that resistance starts going away if that value goes down. So it's very important. It's one that we have to design for, and the master of the vessel, whoever is in charge of that vessel, he has to, that's one of the first things he has to do is make sure that he doesn't load too much deck cargo up high and allow his center of gravity to go beyond, which would give him less GM, which is the measure of your initial stability. So he's putting his vessel in danger. And
So the master of the vessel really has to know his vessel. He has to know how it's built, where his center of gravity is, and the top-off line.
Yes.
As far as whatever his cargo is, he can't go above that.
Yeah, he needs to know. In the regulations for the Coast Guard and the other flag states, the master is in ultimate charge of his vessel, and it has a whole list of everything he needs to know. And one of them is he has to have thorough knowledge of the Marine Operations Manual. And it gives all the criteria for safe operation, watertight integrity, which hatches have to be closed during a storm or under tow. And the way I look at it, we have a naval architect designs a ship. God designed man. Unfortunately, man made a mistake in the Garden of Eden. So he's born, when he's born, he's not upright, is he? He's not, he's burdened already. He has a burden as he goes through life that if he doesn't get right with God, he's not going to survive. So,
the environmental elements are going to come against him. He can't keep himself up.
Everything that Satan, everything environmentally can happen to you, and it leads to depression. It's sin. It's everyone is different, but everyone has those things.
Yeah, that's right.
And they have to deal with them.
That's right.
And if you don't have the Lord to help you, you're always going to be about to capsize.
Yeah, that's an interesting, because I mean here you have not only a gospel presentation in this illustration here, but also the Christian life and what happens when we don't let God's rules, His design for us.
Right.
He wants us to be joyful. He wants us to be upright and to enjoy Him and have at least a smoother journey.
Right.
But when He's not first in our life, and we're not adhering to the master of the vessel and the parameters in which He's designed us, then obviously. To borrow a pun, we shipwreck.
Right. Yeah.
We do.
Yeah. To me, reading Acts and all about Paul, to me, it just stands out to me as a perfect parallel of mankind and a vessel at sea.
That's an amazing parallel, and the imagery there. It's so poignant and profound.
Yeah. One interesting thing I noticed is when they deciding that what was it? They were looking at their progress. They didn't listen to Paul when he had gave them the advice, but they decided to go ahead and sail on to reach Phoenix further west and winter there. And it's interesting, like today, on board a vessel today, a rig, the captain of that rig or ship is in ultimate charge. It doesn't matter, even an admiral. We had a situation, my uncle came to work for the company I was with. We worked together for 2 years. He was the captain, and I was basically his chief mate. And we had a really bad, I don't know if you remember, in the late 70s, the British Fastnet race around the southern coast of England. They had a severe storm and lost quite a few sailboats and people. And we were getting 50-foot waves.
Wow.
And these weren't wind-driven, these were swells. They weren't wind-driven waves. All the way up the coast, we were off of Norway, and we were up against the platform that we'd been servicing. And we were afraid our anchors weren't going to hold because we were, the storm was behind us to push us into the platform. And my uncle was the captain, and our anchors had been set for quite a while because we'd come up and anchor to do the work for them. But the Phillips Petroleum, they had a master mariner on board who it's like an admiral over a captain. He says, he came and said, "I demand that you pull those anchors and move this vessel to get away from this platform." And my uncle refused. He said, "If we start messing with those anchors, you're for sure going to pull out of the ground, and then we're going to be driven into that platform, and there's 3,000 people living on it."
Wow.
This was called the Tank in Ecofisk. And they had a big argument, and he said, "I demand you pull your vessel back." And my uncle out, and he said, "Well, you may be the admiral, but I'm the captain of this vessel." He said, "Get off my bridge." But he came back 2 weeks later on another visit, and he said, "Captain Jones, I must offer a formal apology. You were right." So the captain's in charge. So it was surprising to me to see a military commander who's actually on the vessel to take Paul to Rome, having the authority over the master.
Wow.
So I thought that was it's unusual today.
Yeah, and how we gloss over that. We read over that and we don't think about it and the dynamics of that there. But they're now leaving Crete, and they're out in the middle of the Mediterranean, and the distance between Crete and Malta was what, about 500 miles or so? Bill, was it that far?
Was it Cauda, the one that last point of land there? It was at least 500 miles. I don't know for sure because they meandered quite a while.
I'm just looking at it here in Acts, and it says, running under the shelter of a small island called Clauda, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After they had hoisted it up, they used supporting cables and undergirding the ship, and fearing that they might run aground on the shallows of Syrtis, they let down the sea anchor, and in this way let themselves be driven along. The next day, as we were being violently storm-tossed, they began to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands.
All of that is just amazing to me.
So really what they're trying to do, I guess this is where this comes into play, is when they begin to jettison and basically throw things overboard, and they're selective in what they do throw overboard. And I'm sure you see significance in the selection of that. What they're trying to do, I guess, is keep the ship balanced even in the midst of this storm.
Partly they need to, for the vessel to withstand the environmental forces as much as it can, they need to throw that grain off to let the center of gravity come down and give you more of a lever arm to keep the vessel more upright, so it won't get swamped.
And they're actually throwing some very significant stuff. I mean, part of the cargo, which I assume was the grain.
And they talk about it. I think just before they run aground, they try to get rid of as much grain. They ate as much as they could, and then they dumped the grain. Because Paul told them to get something to eat. You're going to need it.
That's a good point. Eat as much as you can before you throw at least a portion of it or the remainder of it overboard.
But there's two reasons for jettisoning. One main reason, like in a storm, is to lower the center of gravity. But if you know you're going to be shipwrecked on a coast, then the more load you get rid of, and even they talk about the tackle, which I believe includes, I read somewhere that probably even included the main mast and the sails and the rigging. because all they had left, they put the foresail up to run aground.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bill, as you talk about that, in Luke's narrative, he does say that they had given up hope, and at this point they were at a point of no return. So when you say that they could jettison the mast and some absolutely essential equipment to maintain their journey, that's past. That's done. They know now.
They know that's the last resort. I think they're interested then in making that as light as possible to be able to go ashore further up on the beach. It didn't work out too well for them. A good thing they did get it lighter, though, probably.
Yeah, that's true.
They would have had loss of life.
Yeah, and they were even getting rid of some of their anchors as well.
They cut the anchors loose, and at one point, you remember that some of the seamen decided to get away. They were going to sneak away on their own with the lifeboat.
Right.
But Paul had said that if anyone leaves, we all are lost.
We're all lost.
So the centurion or the soldier, I think, caught him and wouldn't let him. And then he cut loose the lifeboat and let it drift away.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Is you're right? They cut loose the lifeboat.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what's going on in these men's minds and hearts. Now, Paul had assurance from the Lord that all would be saved. The ship would be lost.
Yeah.
But there was one point in the journey that Paul says, not only the ship but the crew too. But then an angel of the Lord told Paul and assured him that no loss of life.
Yeah.
But the ship would be destroyed because he was reminded, you're still going to have to appear before Caesar.
Yeah.
And I know there's different kinds of anchors. They were talking about a sea anchor here, and they were just dragging it along.
I wanted to mention that. Now, a sea anchor, also called a drogue, all the lifeboats have them that we have. It's part of your main equipment. And it's really just like a canvas drag, really. It's a shaped like a big bucket or something, and you throw it out if you want to try to stay on location. A lifeboat, the ones we have, or life rafts, say, they don't have any means of propulsion. So if you want to stay in the area, you throw out your sea anchor, and it slows the drift. The wind is pushing you, but that sea anchor tends to hold you,
dragging it along a little bit, but the weight slows you down and kind of keeps you on.
Keep you in the area, so that you better chance of finding you in survival.
Wow.
So that was that.
Yeah, I'm reading here in verse 32 where it says the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat, and that would be the lifeboat. And let it fall away, and until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food. Today's the 14th day, he said, that you've been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. 2 weeks here, they're driven seemingly mercilessly, but yet God is still in control.
God is actually steering that ship.
He is. Isn't that the truth? And of course, He's steering us too. Even in the midst of the storms. So Paul is telling them to take courage. Not a hair from the head of any of you will perish, he says in verse 34. So they took bread, he said this, he took bread, gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. And all of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. And all of us in the ship were 276 persons. I mean, this is not a small ship.
It's incredible.
Some of those are guarding not only Paul but other prisoners. And then it says when they had eaten enough, they began to tighten or lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. And I think you have a really good point, because when you get on down into this chapter here, they see a beach and they want to make way to that beach and then just run it aground, but it doesn't quite work out that way.
No, they had a reef there that they didn't know about.
That's right.
Yeah.
And even throwing out the anchors now, I don't know if that's the last resort, but if they
that was probably the last heavy weight they had to get rid of. The tackle, the tackle that they say they got rid of, I'm pretty sure included the main mast, and all that rigging would be quite heavy. And then the only thing they had left was that little foresail. So it's this one right here.
Wow.
I'm
going to hold that up. I don't know if we can see it on camera or not,
Okay.
but hopefully you can.
Yeah, that's all. They
and when you say the foresail, this
that's on the the bow of the vessel.
Right there where my finger is.
Yeah, it's pretty small, but it's helped guide them. And it's also taken them towards the shore. And so yeah, you can see that the main mast there and all that rigging associated with it would have been pretty heavy. That could have gained them another foot or draft or whatever.
You can Google, I think, and Google like a ship that Paul was on his way to Rome or whatever, and there are suggested designs of those ships out there, and you kind of get an idea. But to have 276 people, this is no small, plus the grain and the tackle and the anchors. This is not just a small boat. This is a very significant cargo ship.
Yeah, it's a large
that he's on. And I'm just kind of reading on down here. In casting off the anchors in verse 40, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosing the ropes of the rudders. And hoisting the foresail to the wind. That's little sail that we were talking about.
That was supposed to run them aground.
Right, yeah, because it says they were heading for the beach. So that little foresail was going to carry them, maybe not at great speed, but really they're totally at their mercy, but enough to give them direction and propulsion to get them to that beach. Lightening the ship, then they would not hit as hard and would kind of run up a little bit and soften the impact, I guess, a little bit.
Well, and if it hadn't been for that reef that they hit, they could have been a lot more higher and drier,
Well, it says in verse 41, but striking a reef where two seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern began to be broken up by the force of the wave.
Yeah, it'd be pounded by the...
So that they were just, the ship was literally being beaten apart. I mean, it brings to kind of my mind and my memory of when the disciples were out on the Sea of Galilee. And it says the boat was tormented by the waves. And the Greek there suggests that actually the boat was being beat apart. It was slowly becoming loosened, the boards loosened and the joints, and it was just coming apart. And of course, Christ showed up just at the right time. And in that story, Jesus, when he got into the boat, the storm ceased immediately. John says the boat was immediately at the shore to their destiny. And then the disciples worshiped him. Truly, you are the Son of the living God. So it brings that picture to my mind out on the Sea of Galilee. Here we have this boat totally being torn apart, destroyed by the waves, yet God is still in control. He was in control of that storm on the Sea of Galilee. He's in control of this one on the Mediterranean Sea. And God's purpose is going to be fulfilled in Paul's life regardless of what happens. And, really that kind of gives us some encouragement, too.
Absolutely,
that God's plan for Bill, for Scott, for you listening, God's plan is going to be completed in your life. The storms may get severe, and the vessel that you're on may be torn and battered, but we have a destiny, and God has secured that. He has planned it. It is His plan. And it's just amazing at the dynamic that's going on here.
Yeah, to me, the parallels are just incredible. The life of man and the life of a ship.
And it takes an experienced mariner such as yourself to read this chapter and look at those parallels, because I've just read over it, as Luke has given an account how they survived and the severity of the storm. And I do see the sovereignty of God in all this. Yeah. But yet the intricacies and how it parallels with our own lives. I mean, just in this is a gospel presentation. It's Christ in us, God equipping us and designing us to live and to serve and to function in a certain way. And when we let the elements go against us, and we begin to lose that center of gravity, that focus on Christ and His Word, and don't pay that much attention to God's design and His instruction booklet there, our center of gravity sort of gets off, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's like the naval architects. We have a Marine Operations Manual that's your Bible, and we call it our Bible to operate the vessel. And it's like God's Word for us, and the Ten Commandments are our operations manual, or should be.
Agreed. Verse 42, I'm looking here. They've struck a reef where two seas met. The boats being just torn apart by the forces of the wave. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners, so that, and that includes Paul, and none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention. And I don't know what the centurion's relationship was with Paul, but you even see God working.
Yeah, I'm thinking they might have ended up being pretty close.
I would think so. Who knows? This man might have been a believer by this time.
That's what I tend to.
But still, you look at God working in the hearts of people. Even in Agrippa and Festus and Felix, and they were totally. They weren't privy to God's plan for Paul necessarily, but God is orchestrating all of those circumstances, the storm, the people, and He really is sovereignly placing and choosing every single person in Paul's life.
Yeah, even though a lot of those people, they're not Christian. Yeah. But they're serving their purpose.
They are.
Kind of like Moses and Pharaoh.
Yeah, absolutely. Pharaoh probably was not privy to what, and certainly probably never thought that you and I would be sitting here millennia later talking about Pharaoh and God using him, and he an unbeliever, and God using Moses. Probably Moses didn't think we'd be talking about him either, but it's not because those men were great or those men were not great, but really focuses on the great God.
His overall plan.
Is over. And I'm reading the final verse here in chapter 27. It says, and the rest should follow, some on planks. Well, it says right here, wanting to keep Paul safe in verse 43, kept them from their intention and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. And the rest should follow, some on planks and others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they all were brought safely to land.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful way, to end that chapter, and it's like a movie, really. The way Luke writes is playing out before us. Yeah. And it also makes me think too, Bill, of how Luke recorded this and what he recorded. He had great sources there because they found that they were on the Isle of Malta. They didn't recognize the land. They didn't really know where they were until they got to...
That was the point. Most people think that the vessel came aground up at what they call St. Paul's Bay now, but it's up on the northern end of the island. But when you look at it, and I had a map there somewhere, but if you look at the maps, there's St. Thomas's Bay on the southeast corner. It matches, first of all, the description they saw the bay. It matches the water depth of the soundings they took for where they dropped the anchors. 4 anchors have been found in that water depth that are from a Roman ship.
Repeat that. 4 anchors have been found at that depth from that era?
I believe all 4 of them have. There's
Wow.
one of them is in a museum somewhere. It's available. But the other one, I think they got 2 of them up, but and one of them is available to see. I can't remember where it is.
Well, that tells me that there's quite a few people interested in this shipwreck and have gone to great lengths and expense too to explore it.
Right. Yeah. There's an archaeological guy. I forget his name, but that's what he's doing. He's researching it, and his research. He's pretty convinced that the ship, based on the weather pattern, and when they said they saw, the sailors in the morning, they didn't recognize it. Well, many of them, sailors all over the world, when you see a bay or see another harbor when you're coming in, oh, hey, we're back in Malta or wherever,
Right.
But nobody recognized it.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
I'm fairly convinced that they're right. It's St. Thomas's Bay on the southeastern coast, where there were found anchors in that water depth, and the description, even where the 2 seas meet, there's the formations lead you to think that could be what they saw.
Well, this is an amazing conversation, and just looking at Luke's detail and the principles really that govern good seamanship and what they had to do and what God led them to do to preserve life, to preserve Paul's ministry. And of course, the island of Malta is not going to know what really hit him, because once Paul is there and he's bit by a snake and he doesn't die and all of this, they immediately go from this man surely has done something wrong. He's had to be a murderer or something, because if the sea didn't kill him, the snake's going to kill him, but he doesn't swell, he doesn't die, and then immediately say, well, this man's a god.
And then he saves the man's son's life, doesn't he? It brings him back to life.
Well, I'll have to read on to that in chapter 28.
Oh, okay,
But it's amazing, though, what God, and I see the subheading here in the Bible that I use here, chapter 28 says safe at Malta. So that's really where we're going to pick up next time, and I just, there's so much that Bill has not covered, and we may have to bring him back and get some more detail next time. And I know this is a little lengthier video than normal, but the great thing is you can hit the pause button and take a break, have a meal, a snack, or whatever, and come back to it. But it's just fascinating to me. God's Word is just so exciting. It's no accident what Luke records. He was there. He's firsthand. And it's interesting what he chose to record, Bill, in chapter 27. It's interesting what he chose to record, and probably not to record, and how the Holy Spirit is working in all that. But he also probably garnered not only from observation, but instruction too from those mariners as well. And describes this in great detail.
Yeah, he does just a wonderful job. He was such a great narrator. And,
It's indeed, as he told Theophilus as he's writing to him, and he's writing to Theophilus, but he says, my purpose is in the Gospel of Luke and in the Book of Acts is to set down a detailed account what Christ began both to do and who he was and the ministry. And of course, that continues in the Apostle Paul. Well, Bill, thanks so much. I just appreciate you being a part of this. This is so exciting. And this illustration, I tell you, is just absolutely fantastic. And who would have thought that you look at chapter 27 of the book of Acts and you can see the gospel. The salvation of God, the sanctification of God, the preservation of God, and the glorification of Himself as well as us. And I'm glad you've joined us, and I hope many more will choose to tune in, especially on this particular segment, as we're here with Bill Waldroop and and just talking about what God has done through this. Come back and join us. We're going to get back into Acts chapter 28. It's unbelievable that we've come this far, and here we are in chapter 28, and we're going to see what God's going to do in the life of Apostle Paul. Well, God bless you. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you very soon, and hope to be seen by you soon as well. God bless you.